Here is your Africa True Story. Africa and African Diaspora. They rarely talked about Middle Passage and the death of millions of enslaved Africans in the Atlantic. The Middle Passage was the first voyage of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World. From about 1518 to the mid 19th century, millions of African men, women, and children made the 21 to 90-day voyage aboard grossly overcrowded sailing ships manned by crew mostly from Britain, Netherlands, Portugal, and France. More than 12.5 million Africans were held captive on 40,000 plus voyages during the transatlantic slave trade. Many did not survive the voyage, and the Atlantic seabed became their final resting place. Slaver captains anchored chiefly off the Guinea coast for a month to a year to trade for their cargoes of 150 to 600 persons, mostly of whom had been kidnapped and forced to march to the coast under wrecked conditions. While at anchor and after the departure from Africa, the ships were exposed to almost continuous dangers, including raids at port by hostile tribes, epidemics, attacks by pirates or enemy ships, and bad weather. Undergoing all these horrible conditions, the enslaved also had to cope with physical, sexual, and psychological abuse at the hands of their captors. Despite, or perhaps in part, because of the conditions aboard the ship, some Africans who survived the initial horrors of captivity revolted. Male slaves were kept constantly shackled to each other or to the deck to prevent mutiny, of which 55 detailed accounts were recorded between 1699 and 1845. So that the largest possible cargo might be carried, the captives were wedged below deck, chained to low-lying platforms, stuck in tiers, with an average individual space allotment that was 6 feet by 16 inches wide and perhaps 3 feet high. Unable to stand erect or turn over, many slaves died in this position. If bad weather or equatorial calms prolonged the journey, the twice daily rations of water plus either boiled rice, millet, cornmeal, or stewed yams was greatly reduced, resulting in starvation and attendant illnesses. In the daytime, weather permitting, the enslaved were brought on deck for exercise, which included jumping up and down for hours. At this time, some captains insisted that the sleeping quarters be scrapped and swabbed by the enslaved themselves. In bad weather, the oppressive heat and noxious fumes in the unventilated and unsanitary holds caused fevers and dysentery, with a high mortality rate. Death during the Middle Passage, caused by epidemics, suicide, fixed melancholy, or mutiny, have been estimated at 13%. So many bodies of dead and dying Africans were thrown into the ocean that sharks regularly followed the slave ship on their way westward. Those who were not killed by conditions on board were often permanently disabled by beatings or disease. Many slave captains threw sick or injured Africans overboard so that their losses would be covered by insurance. Though they were shackled, sickened, and outnumbered, captive Africans frequently fought back against their tormentors. On more than 300 voyages, the captive on the slave deck attempted to overthrow the crew, and in several cases, they triumphed. In 1839, the victorious Africans on the slave ship Amistad even succeeded in sailing the ship into port and eventually returned home to freedom. Despite some little triumph, losses were most accounted for, especially with Africans who were thrown overboard to drown and be feasted by sharks. Upon arrival in the New World, enslaved Africans underwent the final stage in the process of enslavement, a rigorous process known as seasoning. Many slaves died of disease or suicide, but many other African captives conspired to escape slavery by running away and forming maroon colonies in remote parts of South Carolina, Florida, Brazil, Guyana, Jamaica, and Suriname. Enslaved Africans who died in captivity on slave ships were displaced from their native land, separated from their culture, severed from home and family, and denied traditional burial. With no means to ritualize death, death threatened the deceased with eternal alienation. Trauma and loss at sea were emblematic of the terror of the Middle Passage, the memories of which were carried into the New World by the many millions who survived the crossing. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and like our video. It's the best way of supporting us. And remember, Africa is watching.